And as we mentioned at the top of the show, China's gross domestic product increased 7.7% year on year in the first quarter of 2013. That's down from 7.9% in the fourth quarter of 2012. Economists were looking for growth of around 8%. So does the disappointing figure suggest China's economy is losing steam faster than expected? Joining us to discuss this is Ann Lee, the author of What the U.S. Can Learn from China, a senior fellow at Demas and an adjunct professor of economics at New York University. And thanks again for joining us.
Great to be here.
And what do you make of this number?
Well, I think it's too early to be concerned about them. I think actually the data supports what the government has been trying to do, which is to rebalance their economy away from industrial production and exports to more of a consumer economy. Because if you drill down at the data, you've seen that consumption growth is growing. You've seen that income is growing as well. And yes, industrial production is slowing down, and electricity that goes with the production is coming down. And so they're actually doing a great job steering this Titanic to rebalance this economy.
So you're choosing to focus on the good news here. And as you said, consumption was up by 4.6%, and the median earnings were increasing as well. So no signs of unemployment concerns. But what is concerning is that in the second half of last year, the government had a $157 billion infrastructure stimulus package, and that credit issuance is up 60%. So why have those tools not taken hold? Why have they not been as effective as hoped?
Well, the $157 billion for stimulating infrastructure is actually not just simple building of real estate, for instance. It's actually going into much more complex things such as water treatment plants and high-speed rail. So when you understand that these projects aren't something that you can just put together overnight, it actually takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of design, and so that is going to take time for that money to be spent, and therefore this is not something that needs to happen overnight. So I'm not so concerned about that stimulus package. Regarding the credit growth, now the only concerning part there is if that credit growth is primarily only going to state-owned enterprises and it's not being distributed across all the entrepreneurs and all the small and medium-sized businesses. So what would be concerning is if the money was not getting into a broader sector of the economy and only concentrating in a few hands. What China needs to do is to make sure that the middle class continues to grow, and that's how they're going to hit that 8% down the road. And so as long as they make sure the credit growth is going to a broad range of people, then that would be good.
We had a relatively in check CPI number. Inflation came in at 2.1% in March. Do you think that this could tempt China's leadership, new leadership, into a more aggressive approach to boost GDP? Or do they still need to be very careful with any form of stimulus measures to keep inflation in check?
I think there's always the temptation to do that, right? If there's political pressure to hit higher numbers. However, I think that the leadership also understands that monetary policy has its limits, because even though people often want to lower interest rates or lower taxes, that doesn't necessarily translate into more jobs. The leadership's more concerned about making sure people get jobs, and so if job growth continues, then that's fine.
So you don't think that the government's going to take any action based on this report?
It's probably too early to tell. I think they're going to sit and watch and get more data before they act too quickly.
Now, one thing that we saw is that China's real estate investment rose 20.2%. Revenues from property sales were up about 60%. So we are getting indications that the housing market is still rather hot. Do you think we can see tightening of monetary policy, or is that then going to further hamper growth?
I think the announcements a few weeks ago that they're going to start taxing real estate is actually a great move, and that there are plenty of folks who are already feeling that. So I don't think that tampering with monetary policy is the best way to address real estate. Hiking taxes on that would actually be much more effective.
What do you think is a reasonable goal for China's GDP? I mean, at 7.7%, it is still the envy of most of the world. It's still a huge growth number. Sure, it's not 8%, but it's certainly a very strong, robust number. What do you think is a reasonable forecast?
Well, as China gets larger, I'm saying that you don't need to have as high a growth rate in order to create just as much economic growth in the country. You can create just as many jobs with a lower growth rate if you already have a big economy. So I don't think that they need to hit 8% necessarily.
Okay, well, thank you so much. That's Ann Lee, author of What the U.S. Can Learn from China.